Okay, it's recording now. I just want to make sure it's okay that we can put this up on the Royal website with everyone. Chris, that's okay?
Yes, it is.
Jean?
Yep.
Derwin?
Yep.
Robert? Yes, I'll take the head nod. And then I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's our moderator today. He's going to give us a little rundown of what's happening. Chris, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Joe. Thanks for setting this up. As you're one of the people who's had a trying day, as has Jean, we were hearing. So hopefully this will be nice and relaxing. And we've got three terrific panelists talking about thematics. And I'm going to describe each of them before their presentation. And so Jean has spent her day as a hematologist and leukemia researcher. She works in Toronto and she has a special interest in medical philately. And that has been developed into a thematic history, a thematic exhibit about the history of blood and transfusion medicine, which started as a two-frame national level silver winner in 2015. And 4 years later was the 5-frame grand winner at Campex in 2019. She's also written a number of articles on different aspects of medical philately for the Canadian Philatelist. And you may have seen her also on Canadian Stamp News, where she has been interviewed about her current active interest, which is COVID-19 related philately. And that's what we're going to hear about today. So Jean, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Chris. So let me just... So can you guys see my screen?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So thanks for that introduction. So I'm going to talk about COVID-19 philately, and I've been, since the beginning of the pandemic, just over a year now, I've been collecting like crazy because there's a lot of stuff coming out. So, why is this an interesting thing for me to collect? And aside from the fact that I'm interested in medical philately, I think COVID-19 is a really interesting topic or thematic to collect for a lot of reasons. So first of all, as I mentioned, it fits into my medical philately interests. I have a lot of different side interests. As I sort of fill out one aspect and it gets harder to find stuff, I branch into other aspects. So COVID was a natural extension of my usual collecting interests. And it's a highly relevant topic, and there's multiple different storylines that you can explore related to COVID-19. So that makes it very interesting. There's been a huge number of stamp issues. I did a rough count about a week or so ago, and just official COVID issues, there've been over 70 already from different countries. And that's not counting all the agency issues like from Stamperegia and other agencies and the more tangential issues. And some of those I'll show you today as well. So there's a lot of stuff to collect, and not only just stamps, there's a lot of different kinds of philatelic elements to collect. There's postal stationery, there's postmarks, there's slogans, and I'll show you some of the variety of things too. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff to look out for. And then it also gives you a chance, because there's been so much disruption of life, including, flights and travel and mail service, there's actually really interesting postal history that you can collect, and we're living through it. So you're able to actually collect it in real time, as opposed to, other topics where you're sort of looking back and retroactively or retrospectively trying to find these things. So, it's a chance to look for things that are happening in real time. So you've probably heard me talk about, or you may have heard me talk about COVID-19. I've given, I think, 3 or 4 different presentations now. The latest one I gave was to the for the American Topical Association, Fall for Topicals, back in October. And that presentation, it's available online on the American Topical Association website, so you can always go and take a look at it. But I organized that as a story. So I told the story of the pandemic around sort of 5 big chapters, and I just showed a lot of stuff, different kinds of philatelic elements to illustrate the story in all these different chapters. And so that's sort of the crux of a thematic collection, is that you're not only collecting things that show pictures of the particular thing you're collecting, right? So for example, if I'm collecting COVID-19, a topical versus a thematic collection would just be stamps that have pictures of the coronavirus on it. You know, just like an easier example might be if you have a topical collection of trees, you're only collecting stamps that have trees on them. But for a thematic collection, the difference between topical and thematic is that the thematic collection also builds on the story around your main topic. So you're talking about, you know, what the pandemic is doing, how it's disrupting life, how we're all pulling together, how essential workers are helping us through it, and what sort of public health measures. So these are all stories that are peripheral. You know, they're not just pictures of the virus, but they're actually telling how it's impacting everything. So I think that makes this sort of a collection much more interesting. So if you were going to do something on trees, you know, you would talk about the forest and deforestation and who lives in the forest, you know, the fauna and, you know, logging and the industry around the forest. So there's all kinds of stuff you can talk about to tell the complete story. Okay, so for tonight, though, I don't have time, obviously, to go through all of that. So just wanted to give some examples. So for example, if you were just, you know, to try and illustrate the difference between topical and thematic a little bit more, if you were just going to focus on a topical collection of coronavirus, or specifically COVID-19 virus, there certainly are a lot of stamps that can illustrate that. So this was the very first stamp that came out back in March last year. It was issued by Iran, of all places. It was actually difficult to get initially, but this was the very first stamp that came out in the pandemic related to COVID-19. So it doesn't actually say COVID-19 because it came out very shortly after the WHO gave the coronavirus its official name. So I guess they didn't have time to put it on the stamp. Vietnam, a couple weeks later, issued a pair of stamps that actually was the first stamp to actually say COVID-19. So again, you know, there's pictures of the coronavirus on these stamps. So you can, you know, these would fit into a topical collection. And then, you know, don't limit yourself to just stamps. So this was an issue by Serbia later in the years, in the fall. It was actually their Joy of Europe issue. So every year they issue a stamp for the Joy of Europe. This is a competition for children to enter art. And they pick, you know, different artwork in different age groups. But in 2020, it was converted into a virtual exhibition. So kids would send in their virtual art, and they had an online virtual exhibit. So they issued a sheet of stamps, basically the same stamp design with a bunch of labels, but in the salvage of the sheets, they had pictures of the coronavirus. So you could collect this as part of a, you know, topical collection of coronavirus stamps. There were some, this is a private post stamp from Germany. So again, you can see the spike proteins in the coronavirus. A lot of pictorial postmarks had depictions of the coronavirus. So this was the very first one that came out of Croatia, originally scheduled for the end of March, but then there was a big earthquake, so they postponed it to the end of April, but again, shows the coronavirus. And then the Vatican issued an aerogram with a printed indicium that has a picture of the virus. And I don't know, presumably this is a vaccine or something which is killing the virus, but this, you know, also had a picture of the virus. So these are all things that actually depict the coronavirus. Then you can look for things like meter cancel. So this is a meter from Algeria that talks about, sorry, I can't remember I think it's stay safe or stay home. And there's a picture of the coronavirus there. This was, you know, you could see the coronavirus on overprint. So this was from a set of souvenir sheets that were made for New Zealand 2020. So that was a big international show scheduled for March last year. And because of all the travel restrictions, it was downgraded to a national show. And then actually halfway through the show, it was canceled because of all the spread of the coronavirus. So different postal agencies had prepared souvenir sheets for the show that they never ended up selling at the show. So this is from Australia. So what they did was they took these, they're all numbered, and they overprinted them with COVID-19 and they sold them through their website. So these were very popular. This is a souvenir sheet, or a sheetlet from Indonesia containing a set of 3 stamps that they issued for the pandemic. And you can see the coronavirus is printed in the selvage here. But what's really cool is that if you actually look at this sheet under UV light, there are actually more coronaviruses that pop up on top of the stamps themselves. So, you know, these are all different ways or to depict the coronavirus, different kinds of philatelic elements that you could put into a topical collection. But, you know, there's so much more interesting stuff to collect around the pandemic rather than just showing the coronavirus. So, you know, like I said, there's all these other different aspects. So I'm gonna, you know, I don't have time to go through everything, but I'm just gonna show you some highlights. And, you know, if you've seen my previous presentations, there's a lot of new stuff, actually. I tried to pick stuff that I hadn't shown before. So, so this hopefully won't be too much of a repetition, but I just wanted to show you some items that relate to these two sort of storylines, right? The different public health measures that were put into place to try and control the spread of the virus, and how the virus and the pandemic, including these public health measures, how they disrupted normal life. And of all the things I'm going to show you in the next few slides, none of them have any depiction of the coronavirus. So, but they're still highly relevant to the pandemic. So the first is just a booklet cover. So France issued a set of 12 stamps, and this is just the cover of the booklet showing somebody putting on a face mask. This is a registered mail receipt from India. We know it's registered because of the letter R here. And there's a little message down at the bottom here. I don't know if you guys can see it. It says, wear masks, stay safe. So this is an official, you know, receipt from India Post for registered mail. So this could be used in a thematic exhibit. And it's all related to, you know, wearing masks and trying to reduce the spread. These 4 stamps are from a larger set of definitive stamps that Mexico issues. So this is a multi-year ongoing definitive set that they issue every year or so with different denominations. But they issued an emergency printing of these stamps. So normally they're gummed perforated stamps, but they issued these emergency self-adhesive stamps with rouletted perforations that were really quite rough, as a way so that people could use these stamps without having to lick the stamps. So, you know, again, addressing ways in which people were trying to reduce transmission of the virus. I really like this stamp. So this is a stamp from French Polynesia, showing 2 ladies here wearing face masks that match their outfits. But it also illustrates social distancing. And I didn't realize this at first. Somebody pointed it out to me a little while ago. So, but you know, we've talked about social distancing and everyone has to stay apart by 2 meters. Well, this stamp illustrates social distancing by the coconuts on the ground. So people need to social distance by the distance of 6 coconuts. So I thought that was really cool. Here's a meter mark from Germany. This is from the Oberbürgerliche Kreis District Administrator Office. And the German here translates as keep your distance, cover your mouth and nose, protect yourself and others. So these are all things that you can use in a thematic exhibit to illustrate the kinds of, you know, public health measures that were undertaken in different countries. These 2 are ATM stamps from Israel that were issued in early February. So the interesting thing about these, so first of all, it shows, so it celebrates the Magen David Adom, which is the Israeli Red Cross. And it shows a drive-through COVID-19 test center. And this guy here is testing this driver. The interesting thing is that the 00001 is the machine number for when you order, if you order stamps from the Philatelic Center, you get them with this machine number. But if you actually go to Tel Aviv in the post office where these were being printed, there's another machine there that you can get these stamps out of. And the machine number for that machine is 00450. So, you know, you can collect these kind of 2 varieties if you're, you know, if you like that kind of stuff, or you could just collect the one from the Philatelic service. Here's a postmark from Korea that shows the drive-through testing. This is a nice pictorial postmark from India that actually shows a contact tracing app that's used in India. This is the name of the app. And the logo of the app you can see at the bottom of the postmark here. And this is just showing, you know, how the spider web of contacts goes out from a positive test. So these are all aspects of testing, contact tracing, you know, these are all ways to control the pandemic. And then as the pandemic dragged on and we went into Christmas time, we started to see messaging around the sort of holidays. You know, this one's from the Philippines. It says, spread Christmas spirit, not the virus, always wear a mask. It shows a postal worker who were, you know, postal workers were really frontline workers throughout the pandemic, helping to keep us connected and deliver mail. And they produced this really nice Christmas cover. It's an older cover actually, but with the current postmark. And both Guernsey and Jersey did an underprint on their Post and Go strips with a message wishing you a safe Christmas. So again, not obviously COVID-19, but certainly relevant to people having to shelter and not being able to have large family gatherings and trying to stay safe that way. Ireland issued, I think, 5 or 6 different stamps in their Christmas set, and one of them showed this family having a virtual celebration with their friends on the screen here. And then we got into February, and Philippines issued this Valentine's Day stamp showing 2 people wearing masks and social distancing. So what I really like to collect are, in addition to all these obviously, stamp issues and other things that are coming out from the different postal agencies, I like to collect things that are sort of less philatelic or more, on commercial mail. So India has produced a whole ton of special covers and postmarks, and I haven't even tried to get all of this. It's impossible to get all of them, I think. But I have friends in India that have sent me some examples, which is great. So I collect whatever comes my way. But a friend of mine sent me this, which I really like. So this is actually just commercial mail. So it's actually government mail. He works in the customs service in Bengaluru. And this envelope came with this hand stamp on it that says, frequently wash your hands with soap, wear your mask properly, and maintain safe distance. And in all the different postal circles in India, there were actually different examples of this postmark with the same messages, but just different configurations. So, I really like this one. I like to find things that are sort of more commercial rather than philatelic, and I prefer to use those in my exhibits when I can find them. And then you can look for things that came out during the past year, but are not necessarily directly COVID related, but will show you aspects of the pandemic. So for example, this is a postal stationery envelope from Romania that is celebrating 140 years of diplomatic relations between Romania and the USA. And, at first glance, there's nothing obviously COVID about it, but if you actually look at this picture, you can see that the American and the Romanian military officer are actually doing the COVID handshake, right, with their elbows, where, COVID has gotten rid of people actually doing the traditional handshake, but doing, elbow bump or fist bump. So this is another aspect, another thing that you can use to illustrate how COVID has changed our interactions. This one is really cool. So this is a mini sheet from Papua New Guinea. That was part of a larger set issued to celebrate 50 years of their national newspaper, which is called the Post Courier. So again, nothing obviously COVID about it, but if you look at this stamp in the upper left corner, it actually shows a guy sitting at one of their beaches reading a newspaper, and the headline is lockdown, and it shows a politician wearing a mask, and it's actually, from a paper announcing the first day of one of their lockdowns. And I had to squint to make this out, but I think what that smaller yellow headline says is spread the message, not the coronavirus. So, I love finding stuff like this where it's not, the connection's not obvious, but, if you dig hard enough, you can find these. And these are kind of rewarding to me. And I think in an exhibit, shows that you've kind of done, gone beyond the sort of obvious issues and done a little more research and found these sort of things that are maybe a bit more tangentially connected. This one was really cool too. So this is, one of my collections is Europa issues. And so Europa is, every year there's a different theme, and many European countries issue their own stamps around this one theme. So I kind of like collecting it because it's sort of omnibus, but the issues in most cases are not common design. They're all different designs. And so the theme in 2020 was ancient postal routes. So it's really interesting to see how different countries deal with the theme. So this is the stamp from the Azores that was issued in May last year. And at first I didn't notice it, but I can't remember, I twigged onto it somehow because I saw something on Del Camp. But if you actually look at it, one of the cards that's depicted on here is a postal stationery card from 1954, which has a cachet printed on the left here from the Portuguese League of Social Prophylaxis. So this was an organization that dealt with social hygiene and cleanliness and, trying to stamp out diseases like syphilis and other STDs. And they printed a series of cards. These were actually earlier postal stationery cards that they overprinted with a new denomination. And then there were 9 different cachets with 9 different social hygiene messages. So the one that's depicted on this card actually went onto Del Camp which is a great source for thematic items, actually much better than eBay, because there's a lot more, thematic collecting is very popular in Europe, and a lot of sellers will list things with thematic keywords, so you can find things really easily. So I found different examples of the other, the 9 different cards, but this particular one, and I don't know if it's a coincidence that they happened to pick this one during 2020, but the message on this one translates as cleanliness frees you from dangerous contagions. So, not COVID-19 related, but certainly relevant in the year 2020. And stamp designs happen for a long time before the stamps are issued. So, I don't know if this was really done on purpose or not, but, it's certainly something that you can use to illustrate that kind of point. So a chance to collect postal history in real time. I'm going to show some examples of things that you can do as they're being issued. Now, this is always something that you can try and find afterwards, but it can be more difficult, especially if quantities are limited. So one of the things that was really cool to try and collect was different examples of returned covers, because a lot of postal services suspended mail service between certain countries. Some countries have shut down and not opened up yet, like Malaysia, I think, still has no postal service except to Singapore. So, most countries have opened up again, but some countries still have limited mail service to certain areas. And so this is a letter that I sent to a friend in Brazil in early June. I actually hadn't checked if there was postal service to Brazil. So I sent it to him, and it was returned to me after a couple of months with this sticker on it. And this sticker is actually a 2-part sticker. So you can peel the top part off, and it reveals an under layer, which is transparent. So once service resumed later in August, I peeled the top layer off and reposted it back to him, and it eventually arrived in Brazil in mid-October, and then he sent the cover back to me. So that's really, that's a really cool piece in my collection, which just shows the mail disruption. But you can find, I have some other returned covers from other countries. So there's different labels and markings that different postal agencies use. So that's something that is fun to try and collect. And then the other part of collecting in real time is trying to get pictorial postmarks. So a lot of postal agencies will produce bulletins. So for example, the USPS, the United States has a bulletin that comes out that announces the pictorial cancels that are going to be upcoming in the following month. Germany does it, Italy does it. You have to look a little bit online, but many countries announce their postmarks ahead of time. And then you can send covers to, the address in the bulletin requesting postmarks. And if you send it with appropriate postage, they will actually cancel the cover and mail it to you. Or you can request them to be canceled and then mailed back to you under another cover. So I've been on the lookout. I've got friends in other countries too who are keeping an eye out for me. So this was a postmark in Germany in September. There was a big steam locomotive festival that was canceled because of COVID. It says here, abgesagt wegen Corona. So that's canceled due to Corona here. And so I had a friend in Germany send covers to request the postmark for me, and then they were mailed on to me. So I have this really cool cover that's got 2 stamps actually and 2 different postmarks. So, you can find some sellers on Del Camp, like there are ones in Spain and Portugal that will send out a bunch of these and then sell them on Del Camp. But, if you want one to your own address, you have to kind of do it in real time. Some of these are available usually for a month or 2 after the date of the cancel, but some countries are very restricted. So for Croatia, for example, they'll let you mail the cover the first day of the cancel, but after that you can apply the cancel, but you can't mail the cover anymore. So if you want to get a mailed cover, you have to kind of act fast. The US had a few. So this was one for Fleet Week in New York that was canceled back in May. So this is where these big ships, military ships pull into a big city, and the seamen can come off and tour the city, and then people in the city can come on and tour the boats. And so this was canceled. So I just pulled this picture from eBay. So, people can send away for these cancels. And this is one that was just like a personalized cachet, but it wasn't put in the mail. So you can find these afterwards as well. But like I said, if you want one mailed to yourself, you have to kind of act at the time that the cancel is available. And actually, they're making another one. So this will be coming out at the end of May. It's Fleet Week again. So you get 2020 and 2021 Fleet Week New York is canceled again. So you can send away for this. In the bulletin, they have this information where, you know, the postmaster and the postal station where you can send away to ask for it. This particular one was for Pensick War, which is sort of a medieval camping event put on where people get dressed up and they do these mock battles. But it was canceled, and they held a virtual event the week of August 3rd to 7th. And what I didn't realize until afterwards was that there were actually 2 dates for this canceled. The only one illustrated in the bulletin was the August 3rd date, which was the first date of the virtual week. So I asked a friend to send for me, and he sent the letters ahead of time. And so they all got the August 3rd cancel. But then I saw some other ones show up a bit later that had the August 7th cancel. So he sent some more letters, and I got one also with the August 7th cancel. So I think the ones that got to the post office before August 3rd all got the August 3rd cancel. And then the ones that got there later all got the August 7th cancel. So, you know, you have to kind of be like, have your feelers out all the time, because you're, you know, looking for stuff like this. Then there were cancels that were prepared, but weren't used because the event was canceled. So this was a postmark prepared by Deutsche Post, so Germany, for a big fair that was happening in Slovenia called Collecta. But Collecta ended up being canceled, so the postmark was withdrawn. You couldn't request it from the German Post. They, you know, this sort of thing is like Deutsche Post would have had a booth at Collecta, and then you could have gotten the cancel there. But since they didn't go and the fair was canceled, they withdrew the postmark. This is another one from Japan for a stamp exhibition that was in early January that ended up being canceled. This one's really cute. It shows an amoeba. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but this is a supernatural monster that protects against pandemics or epidemics. So the interesting thing is that the Collector Society in Ljubljana in Slovenia actually sponsored a postmark themselves for Collecta. You know, Collecta was starting on September 12th. And they had the, you know, it was a club, and they were preparing covers to be sold later on at the fair. And so somebody from the club was preparing covers on September 10th, and September 10th was when the fair was canceled. And so the post office withdrew the postmark, but the guy had already prepared a bunch of covers. And so some of these were sold to the, you know, some of these went into the hands of the collectors there, but some of them made it onto the market. So I was lucky, I was very lucky actually to get one of these. So, you know, this is something that you would never be able to get later on because there were very few produced. You know, so this is another reason why it's great that we're kind of in it, and, you know, you have the opportunity to kind of get these things in real time. A couple other ones that were cool that I'd show you. So this is one from Italy for a stamp exhibition that happened in Vasto called Vastophil. And they've got a really cool picture here of a discus thrower, you know, Olympic, showing how the Tokyo Olympics were postponed to 2021. And this is a discus thrower, and he's actually throwing a coronavirus. So I had a friend of mine in Italy who had no idea how to request postmarks, but I found the information online on how you do it. And so he sent, you know, he did it for me. So I'm like educating all these friends in other countries on how to send away for postmarks. And then this is a cool one from Spain. This is a oceanographic, I'm probably not pronouncing that right either, research vessel that was going to go on this big Antarctic expedition. And so the crew were supposed to quarantine before they sailed. It was near the end of December, but I guess some of them probably didn't quarantine properly. And so after the ship sailed, several of them tested positive for COVID. And then there ended up being a huge outbreak among the crew, like something like 39 people out of the 50 something crew ended up testing positive, and one crewman actually died. So they diverted to another port, and then eventually, after people were treated and got better, they actually came home. So Spain produced this postmark. It's interesting because the date field is empty, so it was first available on March 1st. So so you could see some examples for March 1st, but I actually had someone mail one to me, and it got a March 18th date. And there's this very cool blue hand stamp that describes the Antarctic expedition. This one's actually really cool because the stamp on here, so here's a blow up of the stamp. So this is a stamp issued by Spain last year it was the International Year of Midwives, Nurses and Midwives. And so this was a stamp I'm sure that they had planned for a long time. It shows a woman who, she was a nurse who flew on the first sort of Mercy flight in like 1922. And then it shows a midwife with a baby here. And it sure looks to me like they photoshopped this mask onto this midwife. Like she's wearing an N95 mask to examine a well baby. There's no reason for that. So, you know, clearly there's some influence from COVID-19 and totally doesn't fit with the rest of the design of the stamp, right? So to me, that's kind of a quirky thing to put in my collection also. This is a booklet from Spain showing, encouraging people not to litter and throw their masks. You know, there's so many masks, people are just throwing them everywhere. So this is an issue from Spain about waste management. It's a folder that comes with 6 postcards. These are all postal stationery cards, so they're okay for a thematic exhibit. On the back, there's an indicium printed, which is good for domestic use. And they're all printed on compostable paper. So again, you know, tying in with this waste management and being green. And then the back cover is actually a souvenir sheet with this irregular shaped stamp for €5 showing where to throw your mask. So that's it. I've probably gone over my 15 minutes. But you know, this is the story as I told it back in October. And of course, now we're into the next chapter, which is vaccines. And so just in the last month, there's been, you know, a couple stamp issues. This one was in January when India started vaccinating, but you know, this is from March. There's a couple postal stationery covers from Romania, all about vaccinations. So, you know, I think as the pandemic goes on, there's going to be more and more stamp issues. There's still stamp issues coming out. There was one from Kuwait a couple of weeks ago. There's been a couple from Armenia and North Macedonia just in the last week, you know, so it's ongoing. It's not ending anytime soon. Hopefully the pandemic will, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. One of the features of thematic exhibiting is getting as many different elements and variety of items as possible. And that was an amazing variety of items. And people might be thinking, okay, so what is left for other people to talk about? But they can. And Derwin has done one thing which Jean hasn't. I'm going to go to the end of his biography to comment that Derwin owns 2 square feet of unusable land in Caithness, Scotland, which he's called Tramscanster Bog, and his tiny landlocked estate issues local post stamps. And we're about to hear all about Derwin's other thematic collecting interests when he's not producing stamps as Laird of Tramscanster Bog. He is an accountant. He's held positions in auditing, fraud investigation, risk management in the provincial government. He also is a science fiction writer and recipient of the Aurora Award, a Canadian Science Fiction Writing Award, and the Alberta Book Poster Publishing Award for editing and anthology. So with all those activities, Derwin, please tell us about all your interests and Tramscanster Bog.
Okay, all right, thank you, Chris. All right, can everyone see the picture of Bugs Bunny there?
Yep.
Cool. All right, so thanks, Jean, for talking about your stamps and postmarks and postal stationery regarding COVID. And now I'll talk about expanding your activities in thematic collection, because if you can collect stamps, you can collect postal stationery, you can get postcards relating to themes you're interested in. But what else can you do with your thematic collecting activities? And I'll talk about that. Well, why do I collect thematics? And you know, in case you haven't figured out by now, I'm really interested in science fiction and comic books and animation. And so here is one of the reasons why I like to collect thematics. Is it's a way to combine my interests, right? So I like comic books. So here's an issue of Detective Comics, and here's a postmark, a first day postmark for a Batman stamp. There's the stamp too. Right now, this is a page from my Superman exhibit. And you can see that on this page, I've combined various things which I've collected due to my interest in Superman. here's like a photograph of a cover of a Superman comic, Man of Steel #1, a trading card showing Tom Welling as Clark Kent from the TV series Smallville. And the philatelic item on this page is the Canadian postal card showing Superman in the Odysseum, and it's autographed by Tom Welling. Right? Now, this is from an exhibit, and not everyone wants to exhibit. You don't have to exhibit, but you can set up pages like this for your own collection, where you can combine different things from your different collecting interests together. Right? So it's not just for exhibitors, it's for any sort of thematic collector, and if you have non-philatelic things to show too. Now, one of the things that I do a lot outside of philately is I go to science fiction conventions and comic cons, and inevitably one meets various celebrities and actors there, like Chase Masterson, who played Lita, the Dabo girl in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. There's Chase and I over at Gallifrey 1, the science fiction Doctor Who convention near the Los Angeles airport. So of course I got Chase to autograph one of the Star Trek First Day covers for me. And this is one of the American Star Trek stamps. Then there's also Fan Expo Canada, which I go to every year, well, until the pandemic broke out. And one of the guests there was Eric Bauza, the voice of Bugs Bunny. And he took over after Mel Blanc. And Eric Bauza was there. And I got him to autograph this Bugs Bunny First Day cover for me. Now, when you go to these Comic Cons or sci-fi conventions and ask for autographs from the actors, they will ask you for money for them. That's part of the deal at sci-fi conventions, but that's usually just for actors and other entertainment celebrities. If you meet people who are outside of that business, like say a politician or an author or a writer, they tend to autograph things for free. And at the World Science Fiction Convention, which prides itself as being less oriented towards movies and celebrities and more oriented towards writing, literature, and science, astronauts and scientists are often guests there. So in the World Science Fiction Convention in Dublin in 2019, NASA sent Jeanette Epps on a promotional tour over there. So I met Jeanette Epps, a NASA astronaut, and got her to sign these two First Day covers of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing. Right? And she also brought photographs with her that she signed and gave to people who attended the convention. Now, I've noticed that there's a difference between at least two generations of American astronauts. The Apollo generation, and that includes Gemini and Mercury generation, they don't want to autograph covers or First Day covers. I did meet Buzz Aldrin at a sci-fi convention in the, it must have been the late 90s. Yes, it was the mid 90s. And he refused to autograph First Day covers. He said, "I will not autograph anything philatelic." And I think that's because that Apollo, Mercury, and Gemini generation lived during a time when philately was a big business. You know, there were, every department store had a stamp and coin section, and they knew that covers autographed by them were being sold at high prices to collectors. However, the generation of today's generation of astronauts that goes up to the International Space Station, they'll happily autograph any cover or photograph that you give to them, for free, and they just love doing it. Jeanette Epps was very happy to autograph these two covers. I've gotten Kjell Lindgren, another NASA astronaut, to autograph a cover as well. Right? So the new generation of astronauts has absolutely no problem autographing First Day covers. And then there's also the ground crew at NASA, and Janet Petrel, the deputy director of Kennedy Space Center, visited the Royal Canadian Military Institute and was guest speaker at one of its dinners. And I, being a member of the Royal Canadian Military Institute and a space nerd, of course, had to go there and meet Janet Petro. And I met her at the bar. So here we are at the bar. And at the bar, I got her to autograph this first day cover of an American stamp showing the eagle and the moon. And he also has a nice NASA cachet as well. And here's another interesting autograph I obtained on a first day cover. This is artist Jim Fitzpatrick at the World Science Fiction Convention in Dublin. Right? And Jim Fitzpatrick, he's kind of left-wing, and he's famous for making a portrait of the Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara based on a photograph of Che Guevara. And I got him, and in the Irish Post Office issued a rather controversial stamp showing this portrait of Che Guevara. There it is. I'm sure you've all seen this portrait before. It was a very controversial stamp. The members of the Irish Parliament were actually asking questions as to why Ireland's post office wanted to issue this stamp. And when I saw Jim Fitzpatrick at the World Science Fiction Convention in Dublin, I got him to autograph it. Now getting autographs on covers is one way I've been able to expand the number of items in my thematic collection. Another way is to get different postmarks or cancels that are related to your interests. And one thing I do is I make covers. I send them to post offices to get a cancel or postmark that's related to my interests. So this is a cover I made, and I sent it to the postmaster of Moonbeam, Ontario. And Moonbeam, Ontario has this nice postmark that shows a flying saucer on it. At the bottom here, you'll see the Canada Post webpage where they list all the different pictorial cancels that Canada Post has. If you send your cover to the postmasters listed on this webpage, they will cancel your cover with their town's pictorial postmark, right? And now the instructions on the website say that, they're supposed to cancel the cover and send it back to you through the regular mail stream, right? But I noticed that if you give them an unaddressed cover and a self-addressed stamped envelope, they will cancel them, put it in the self-addressed envelope and send it back to you that way, right? So the cover doesn't have to be postally used through the mail stream. I know some people prefer unaddressed covers and some people prefer addressed covers that actually went to the mail stream. It's your choice what you want to collect. One thing about this Canada Post website is that I've noticed that the list of pictorial cancels isn't kept up to date. For some reason, Canada Post isn't keeping it up to date. So some post offices do acquire cancels that are not on the website. Now, there's also another place from Canada Post where you can get cancels, and that's the National Philatelic Center at Antigonish, Nova Scotia. And they refer to these as customers' own first day covers, even though they're not necessarily first day covers. And you can send covers there, and for a fee, 15 cents per cover, plus HST or GST, depending on what your province charges. They will cancel these covers for you with a postmark of one of the capital cities of the provinces or a major city like Montreal. Right? Now, what's interesting is that this service is not mentioned on the Canada Post website, but it's existed for decades, since at least the 1970s. So you can write away to the National Philatelic Center at this address, or at this email address, and request their one-page sheet on instructions on how to get cancels for your customers' own first day covers from the center. Right? This one-page sheet also talks about the rates they charge. So that's how I got this inauguration cover for Kamala Harris as Vice President of the United States, who, as many of us know, went to Westmount High School in Montreal. Now, what about getting covers canceled at US post offices? I collect Superman comics, which also includes Supergirl comics. And those of you who know the Superman legend or the Supergirl legend know that Supergirl grew up in Midvale, somewhere in the United States. And I found 3 towns cut Midvale in the United States. One of them is Midvale, Utah. So I sent this cover to the postmaster of Midvale, Utah, and asked him to cancel it with his town's postmark and send it back to me in a self-addressed stamped envelope. And down here at the bottom of the slide is the web page where you can find the locations and addresses of the different post offices of the United States Postal Service. It's usually hit and miss when asking postmasters for their town's cancels. I found that most of them are quite agreeable to cancel a cover for you and put it into a self-addressed stamped envelope and send it back to you. Some of them prefer to send the cover not inside the self-addressed stamped envelope. They want it to actually go through the mail. I discovered the Hollywood post office was like that. They simply did nothing with my covers that I sent to be sent in a self-addressed stamped envelope. But then when I tried again and asked them to send my address covers with the international rate stamp on them through the mail, they did that for me with the Hollywood postmark, albeit it took them 3 months to get around to it. Right? And I've heard from other collectors that there's the occasional post office that does neither, but most of the time I can figure a way to get a postmark from a United States post office, right? Like this one. Now, from time to time, the United States Postal Service also has what they call pictorial postmarks, and these are, special postmarks that they make for to commemorate events. And every month, a listing of the new pictorial postmarks appears in the United States Postal Service Postal Bulletin. At this website here, you can download copies of the Postal Bulletin, including the latest issue. And there will always be a section on pictorial postmarks. And the process is that you send your cover to a particular post office which is offering that pictorial postmark. And there's usually a period. It can vary from 30 to 60 days after the date of the postmark when you can still send in covers to get them canceled. Right? So this is somewhat more organized than just sending a cover to a random post office and hoping the postmaster cancels it with the postmark you want. And I've done this several times. Here's an example of a cover I made. And I wanted the Mars 2020 launch station canceled, so I sent it to the appropriate post office with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And a couple of months later, I received the cover back. There's also a website called collectpostmarks.com, set up by an American collector, Peter McGee, I think. And this website also lists new pictorial postmarks that are coming up. And I've also gotten pictorial or special cancellations from the UK, the UK Royal Mail. The Royal Mail actually loves servicing covers for collectors. They have a whole unit for that. They actually have 3 units for that in different parts of the country. And that's how I got this cover with one of the Star Trek cancel on it. What's interesting about the cancellation is that it's one of those cancels which is sponsored by a first day cover firm, paying official first day covers. But because it does not say first day of issue, you could use this cancel on any stamp. So I used it on 2 Machen definitives. Right? And as you can tell by the theme of my cachet, I chose a Star Trek theme. to commemorate the first British Star Trek convention held in a church in Wigton, Leicester. Right? So if you go to this website, right, you can download copies of the postal bulletin. Every month, the Royal Mail issues a new postal bulletin that tells you what special pictorial cancels and first day of issue cancels are coming out in the upcoming month. Right? Not only are there special cancels for new issues and for the first day of new issues, but the Royal Mail also has what they call permanent philatelic postmarks. And here's an illustration of a page of some of them. Each of these postmarks is available on any date from the appropriate station, philatelic station in the UK. The UK has 3 special hand stamp centers. That's what they're called. There's one in London. There's one at Talent's House, Edinburgh, which is the headquarters of the Philatelic Bureau. And there's one in Cardiff, Wales. And so you send away to the appropriate special hand stamp center to get one of these philatelic cancels. And they'll also date it on the date you wish, right? So if there's a certain anniversary or commemorative date you want, the special hand stamp center will set the postmark to that date. What's interesting about getting cancels from the British Royal Mail, let's backtrack to this one. My address is here. I blurred it out for purposes of this presentation, but the Royal Mail insists that every cover needs an address, even if it's being returned under separate cover like a self-addressed stamped envelope. Right? They also insist that every cover bear the appropriate rate to the recipient. Right? So I have to put 2 first-class stamps here to make the foreign rate to Canada. Right? Even though the cover is going back under a separate cover, they want the cover to have the appropriate foreign rate. What's interesting, though, is that the self-addressed envelope doesn't need a stamp on it because the Royal Mail said you've already paid for the postage on the cover that you're sending inside the outer cover. Right? So it's quite a different approach to servicing covers than, say, the Canadian or US post offices have. Right? So here's a cover that I got from one of the special hand stamp centers, the one in London, and it's for the birthday of Leslie Howard, the actor who played Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind. I deliberately made this cover for my Gone with the Wind exhibit. Right. All right. Now, people who've heard my presentations before know that I'm a big enthusiast of do-it-yourself philately. That's making your own items. And that includes making your own covers. And this is a cover I made for William Shatner's birthday. Right, so there's a cachet, right, showing William Shatner, and there's Leonard Nimoy, and Yvonne Craig as an Orion girl, an inmate of a lunatic asylum in the episode Whom Gods Destroy, which a lot of Star Trek fans regard as being one of the worst Star Trek episodes ever made, but it is fun to watch. Right? And I chose the stamp from the Signs of the Zodiac issue with it's the Virgo stamp. And I chose it because it's the one Canadian stamp that shows a green woman, right? And there's an Orion. The Orions have green skin, right? And I got it canceled by the postmaster of Vulcan, Alberta, which has this Spock stick cancel. Right? Now here's other things you can do with covers. I get uncached covers from the United States Postal Service. And sometimes I get artists, like comic book artists I know, to draw the cachet on them. So they're hand-drawn covers. So this is the Joker, drawn by the artist Chris Singeberg, who's now living in Newfoundland. I've known him for years at the various Comic Cons. Right? So he drew this for me in ink. There's Chris holding the first day cover. He's in costume as the Joker at Fan Expo Canada in Toronto a couple of years ago. Right. And here are 2 hand-drawn cachets. on the Wonder Woman first day covers, drawn by Janet Hetherington in a combination of colored pencil and silver ink. And sometimes I print my own cachet on an uncached first day cover. So when the Spooky Silhouettes issue came out, the United States Postal Service sold these on eBay. The United States Postal Service has an eBay store. So I got them and I printed my own cachet showing Joan Bennett and Jonathan Frid in Dark Shadows, right? That's a 1960s soap opera about vampires. Yeah, there actually was such a TV show on ABC back then. American collectors refer to these as add-on cachets, although since I got these first day covers, very shortly after the stamps were issued, I don't know if it really counts as an add-on cachet, but certainly I've seen American collectors print the cachet on, 20 to 30 or even 40 years after the stamp was issued, and those certainly are described as add-on cachets. This is another way of adding a cachet that I've seen American collectors do. It's called the paste-on cachet. Let's say you don't want to run the risk of your cover being accidentally mangoed inside your printer in case there's a printer mechanical error. Right? For example, I had only one example of this Minnesota first day cover without the cachet. So I printed the cachet on a separate piece of paper and pasted it onto the cover. Noah O'Neill, the actress who played Lois Lane, was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, so I thought she'd be a fitting subject for a cachet for the Greetings from Minnesota stamp. Now, it's hard these days to find that traditional letter-sized envelope that many first day covers used to be made on. Right? And it's a nice size of envelope. It was around for at least a century, and you can mount them in your album pages without having to have to rotate them or put them at a tilt. But unfortunately, that size of envelope, I call it the letter size envelope, is hard to get these days. Right? Because the majority of envelopes sold in stationery stores are the business size envelopes. So what I've done is I created my own template in Word to make these envelopes. So what I do is I use a template and then I insert the cachet. It could be a photo, it's often a photograph that I've made and manipulated on Photoshop. I insert it into the table. This is all one table in Word. Then I cut away this part, I cut away that 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 part. And what I've got, I fold and glue into an envelope. And this part up here is the top flap of the envelope. So that's the flap that comes down on the back. So you can design your own templates to create covers as well. So these are just a few examples of where you can go into thematic collecting and expand your frontiers, if you will, in thematic collecting. So thanks, and I hope you were entertained by my segment of the presentation.
Well, thank you, Derwin. That is a terrific variety of methods of creating one's own covers without having to buy land and setting up your own legal post office. So lots of ideas there. One of the themes which people who've been to several of these panels will notice is the constant comment of do what you want in philately. If you're starting, have fun. And Derwin has sort of really brought out the fun aspect of creating covers, and doing exactly what you want is a terrific principle unless you want to exhibit. And if you exhibit, then you suddenly have to start following rules and policies. And the next speaker, Robert Lunn, is a great guy to talk about both aspects of philately. He is a Geographic Information Systems Coordinator for the city of Fredericton. And over the years, he has had fun collecting all sorts of topics. The Canadian 1898 Imperial Penny Postage Stamp, which he exhibited nationally and internationally, Pre-Confederation Prince Edward Island, for which he won a single frame grand award in 2014. And he's a thematic collection and exhibit on Canadian space accomplishments. And he's currently putting together a display class exhibit on the PEI stamp dealer Arthur Bartlett, a postcard exhibit on the architecture of New Brunswick post offices. In his spare time, he's a past board member of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada. And he's currently nationally accredited philatelic judge, and he's a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada since 2019. So Rob has covered all sorts of collecting aspects, and he's going to talk about his Canadian Space Accomplishments exhibit and also comment on sort of some of the guidelines you need to do if you decide to go into exhibiting. So Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Chris. So let's see if I can get this right. Are you seeing my first screen of my PowerPoint thematic collecting?
We are.
Okay.
Well, I am.
Good.
Yes.
And hopefully you still are. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks everyone for attending this presentation. So I'm going to hopefully build upon the things that Jean and Derwin have already talked about here, and but bring in a few other things about the exhibiting side of it, but also give you a little bit of a background of my own thematic collecting and why I've chosen what I've chosen. So how I got started is I've always had a huge interest in space and rockets and astronauts, and I remember the early Apollo launches and the moon landings and so on. Well, I was also in the early 90s a project manager on a project that was funded by the Canadian Space Agency. So about 3 or 4 years after that, in the mail came an invitation to a shuttle launch. And of course, having always dreamed of going down and watching a shuttle launch, I couldn't miss this thing. You had to pay your own way in your own hotel, but you got the VIP tour once you were down there. So this personalized invitation came in the mail from the president of the Canadian Space Agency, Mac Evans. So while there, the Canadians put on a real show. They had by far the largest party, pre-launch party down there, and they'd had Chris Hadfield, one of our Canadian astronauts, and I got to meet him there and talk to him a little bit. And then I was also part of the VIP tour was that you were located at the closest viewing point to the space shuttle itself launching there, and it was quite the event. Like the whole air and the land around you just shook when it took off. So it was an amazing trip that I was able to do. While there, what they set up is a post office in temporary post office in the Saturn V building that's right by the viewing center, and let you mail off mail to back home or wherever. So while I was there, I mailed this letter back to myself. So the zip code there, the 32815, is the actual zip code for this center where you can mail. They set up the post office from. About 4 years later, I was a director at one of a very large international conference here, geomatics conference in Fredericton, and we were lucky enough to get Bjarne Trivigsen, who was the astronaut that I saw take off on that day, to come as a guest speaker for our conference. So while there, I had him sign the cover that I had mailed back to myself. So what you see here is the philatelic element for that would be the thematic, would obviously be the cancel itself, because that's the day of the Bjarne's launch. It's from the closest viewing area. The cachet itself wouldn't typically count as a thematic element, and certainly not the signature, but nonetheless, it's something that I really treasure and that I really enjoy having. On the right there, you see the one of the circular astronaut stamps that Canada Post had produced, and of them, Bjarne being one of them. So when I started off wanting to build a thematic collection, there were the obvious stamps that I was aware of. So like I knew of the Alouette stamp, and I knew of the Canadians in Space stamp with Mark Arnold on it, and of course the very famous holograph stamps. With those, you see the number of the errors, the missing hologram, and the space shuttle being high and low orbit, and meteorites, and so on. The Manitoba stamp with the rocket on it, because at Churchill, Manitoba, a lot of the there were a number of rocket launches made from there for atmospheric rockets. The 2000 stamp there from the Millennium set, showing the different satellites and the different Canada arms that were developed, and of course the astronaut stamp. So these were things that were obvious, and so when I'm starting off, those were things that I knew. So what more could I collect? Well, a good place for any of us as thematic and topical collectors is the if you start with the Unitrade stamp catalog. In the back, you might have noticed the picture here is actually an older one from an older Unitrade on the right there that I have. So there's more that would have been added to the space category since then, but that was a good starting point. So it gives you a listing of the numbers for you to be able to look for stamps. So as you're starting to build up a collection of these stamps for your thematic collection, it's a great place one place to start with. But remember, these are topical in nature, so it's really not really the broader sense of thematic, and we'll be looking at that here in a little bit. So I started with that, doing the research as to what stamps were available. Then of course, you want to build up your thematic knowledge. So a number of whatever our interests are, there's going to be some kind of an organization or agency or so on that are likely related to the topic that you've chosen. And so in my case, because it was Canadian space accomplishments, the good starting point was the Canadian Space Agency itself. And I was fortunate there in that they have a milestones section on there. So what I did was I'd look at that, and it's chronological, so year, and then it gives you a description as to what the event was. So that allowed me then to have knowledge as to a year to look for when I'm looking for material, and also what the event or the item was. So if it was a satellite, it may have been one that Canada produced, but Canada's also participated in the development of pieces of satellites or instruments that go on satellites for many other countries. And so in this chronological listing, it would list that, and then you could go out and search either on the Del Campi or the eBay sites for that. So you're all of a sudden you're starting to go out armed with knowledge, knowing that, okay, this is the country I'm looking for, this is the name of the satellite or the rocket or so on, what is available. So that was a good place to start building up your thematic knowledge. You can add to that by also looking for other sites, like when I just do Google searches to see what was available, like Satellites Canada or Alouette Canada or so on, like the Postal History Corner website was again gave me some more material that I could start looking for and what was available, and it just started build on the knowledge that I had and increasing it. There was a site by fellow Don Hilger that he's got built on the Colorado State University website, and there you can look up different satellites and rockets and so on, and the philatelic material related to it. So in this case here, what you see is the Alouette satellite, and it'll list the different stamps and the different covers and cancels and so on related to that. So again, another great way of learning a little bit more of what is possible. You still have to do all the researching or do all the searching for yourself, but now you're armed with the all important knowledge of what to look for. The other thing to look for are what are the elements that are possible to include in a thematic. Now, we'd already seen that with Jean's presentation, and she had a wide array of elements in that COVID. If you've ever had the opportunity to see her blood thematic exhibit that's won the grand award, another excellent example of an exhibit that has a lot of different elements in it. And if you're going to be exhibiting, that really that's what you're looking for, is what are what are all these elements that you can get. If you're unsure of what an element is or how many the elements are, there's on the American Topical Association, there is the section on philatelic elements for exhibits that you can look up, and it's I don't know an exact number, hundreds or possibly thousands, I don't know, but it's many different possible elements. They may not all be available for your topic, but it's a place to start to look for what is available. So here now I'm starting to I'll start off collecting material. So I've know what are some of the possibilities of things to collect. I've done some thematic research as to what I can look for. I know what some of the elements I could start trying to look for as well. So now I'll go off and do this. So the cover on the left there being the Alouette stamp issued on January 5th, 1966. So the Alouette stamp being your thematic element here. Now, happens to be also part of another collection I have built off of this, or a side collection on the Alouette stamp itself, and therefore the cover is signed by John Chapman, who is the director of the Alouette program and is considered the father of the Canadian space program. So it makes kind of a nice start for my Alouette exhibit, but it's also appropriate for a thematic collection being the Alouette stamp. Canada has never produced a stamp or any other material that I'm aware of, or any other country other than this Mozambique stamp here, with honoring Chapman at all. And so that's an example of a stamp where the father of the Canadian space program is honored, and he's with the Alouette stamp, or Alouette satellite on the stamp there. If you remember back a couple of slides, there was on the Postal History Corner site an example of the this commemorative cancel. It's a Romanian cancel. It's on that page. It was more. It appeared to be a favor cancel, and that it wasn't addressed at all. The postal station wasn't addressed. So I was really fortunate to have found this and really like this item here. So it's one that went through the mail. It's a registered letter. The commemorative cancels, that circular one on the top. It's the postal stationery and the chancellor are commemorating Theodore Ionescu, whose theory on multiple gyromagnetism was demonstrated by the Alouette satellite. So just under the date on the right-hand side, you can maybe make out the word Alouette. So that's Alouette. And then also a rather crude representation of the Alouette satellite. It actually doesn't really look anything like it, but it is definitely a satellite. And that's the philatelic element for this thematic. What you also want in an exhibit then is to bring in some of the philatelic information. So there's information about the cancel itself that you can make, but also the fact that this is registered and that the rate was the 30 leu. I'm not sure how you say the currency in the Romanian currency, but 30 leu on the stamp on the back, and the 10 would have paid the domestic rate for the postal stationery itself. So again, a nice item that is better than the one that was being shown in the postal history corner that would have been more of a favored cancel. Continuing to collect and trying to find other thematic information about Canadian space accomplishments. Again, you have to look at the fact that Canada's participated in many international different endeavors. One on the right-hand side there being the Swedish Viking satellite. So nice airmail cover with the 3.2 krona to Canada there. On the bottom is the aerogram airmail, and in this case, it's the slogan cancel that you're looking at, the Halifax slogan cancel, the Satellite Canada competition. And this was for the naming of, in 1969, they had a competition for the naming of the next series of Canadian satellites. I'll be getting back to that in a little bit here. But again, a nice envelope mailed to Paris, and there's, I believe, about 12 of those different 12 different cities that issued that same slogan. So again, some of the philatelic information that you can bring in with your thematic information that you know about being the satellite competition. On the left-hand side, the Barbados stamps there, and what those are is the harp gun, and you can kind of see it, the title of that, the harp gun, on the 50-cent stamp on the left there. And what that was is that Canada wasn't highly involved in rocketry. Like we actually had one of the most successful rockets being the Black Brant series of rockets, and it was one of the more popular sounding rockets ever built, and it was built by Bristol Aerospace in Winnipeg, and that's depicted on a couple of stamps as well. However, this is an endeavor that a rather interesting fellow by the name of Gerald Bull, who was a Canadian inventor, came up with, is he was looking, instead of rockets, at firing satellites into space from these massive guns and super guns, as they were known, and as an alternative to rockets. So it's a long story about him, really interesting, lots of espionage type of background. Essentially what it comes down to is, like, he did do a lot of testing in the Barbados with these guns, but really what sort of was his undoing was that he had a contract with to do work with the Iraqi government, and obviously they had no interest in launching satellites. They had other intentions for these super guns. So in 1990 in Brussels, he was assassinated by the Mossad to remove that problem as far as development of this supergun. But again, a piece of the history of the Canadian space accomplishments. So back to that story on the satellite naming contest. This is a postage paid government issued reply card for that satellite naming contest. And on the card, so I'm showing here the front and the back, you have the you'd put in what your suggested name is for the satellite and what your name and the address is. And then it would go to the jury, who would happen to be, in this case, Leonard Cohen, Marshall McLuhan, and Jelena, who were on the jury for selecting the satellite name, and the name that they ended up choosing was Anik. So you may be familiar with that as far as the satellite name. So again, stamps that are being produced honoring those folks, but the thematic part is that they were the jury that were selecting the name for the Canadian space satellite. So when we're getting material for our exhibits or just our collection in general, what makes one item more significant than the other? And Jean alluded to this. I don't know how many people picked up on it, was the preference for the commercial covers. So this is a really nice meter cancel, probably a favor cancel. I don't think it would be approved, but possibly a favor cancel of the Telesat meter. Well, an even better one is this cover here. So same meter cancel on there. So why is it better? Well, it's being actually postally used. So you see the rate there, paying the rate of 8 cents. It's Telesat sending it. So you have their name on the, it's their printed cover, going commercially to CN Communications on Metcalfe Street. So this is what I consider a really nice item, and one of the ones I'm really proud of in this particular collection. So a nice piece of modern postal history, and when you're putting it into an exhibit, it just adds another element to of importance. So organizing your material. So categories versus chapters. So topical, and Jean's talked about this, as the topical collections or exhibits would be organized into categories. Thematic is more chapters in a story. So you're building a story here. It's not just a list of categories. So you want to know what are the themes of your chapters of your story. So you want to be thinking of this before you're even really collecting a lot of this material, because you have to know how it's going to fit into it. Once you've started to collect a certain amount of this material, then lay it out, figure out, okay, figure out what your chapters are going to be, lay out your material as into those chapters, and therefore you can see what chapters require more material because you want to look at a nice balance in your exhibit. And so are they balanced? And they won't necessarily be equally balanced, because it all depends on the importance of the topic in that chapter. But you also want to see if you're missing any material. So if there's a chapter that is important to your story and you don't have anything to show for it, well, there is a clue that you better start going out and looking for something, and expand the terms that you use for the terms that you're looking for material. So concluding the story. So in my case, how do I end a story when there's still more material being released? Like it's hard to talk about the next satellite, the next rocket, the next astronaut. There's always something new coming out. So you have to come up with a way of telling an ending to your story, because you don't want it just being left hanging there. So one way is, in my case, was to talk about the future. And this isn't actually a page from the exhibit, but it's or the current exhibit. But what I chose here was the stamps, Stamping the Future by the kids. So what on the bottom there, what did kids view as, what do the children see as the future of space? And you see them going off into space in a shuttle-like spacecraft, or going to the moon, and so on. So it's an idea of what the children think of what the future will be. Also, we have quite a number of our higher education facilities, the universities, that have space-related programs that they teach. So teaching the future scientists and astronauts and so on that are going to be our next leaders in the Canadian space accomplishments. So that's one way of doing it. You could also go and have a little bit of fun with this and try and take a little different approach to it. So if we want to look at the fictional side of it, so the Star Trek, well, if we think of the Canadian input on this, well, two of the actors on the Star Trek series were actually Canadian. Of course, the iconic Captain Kirk being William Shatner, and James Doohan being the Scotty, the chief engineer. So these were the good guys that were on the Starship Enterprise. Well, you also had a number of, there's been a number of Canadians that have played the bad guys, the fun ones, I guess, of the Klingons. And I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but John Colicos was a Klingon commander he was actually the first Klingon to appear on Star Trek, and again, a Canadian. And then you can really sort of stretch it and the story and for Canadian content. And well, how does this Stamp with Wheat fit into it? Well, one of the most iconic shows on the original series was one called The Trouble with Tribbles. And this is where the Enterprise crew were called to guard a shipment of grain that was they called in the show Quadrotriticale. And it was mentioned that actually that it had that the grain had originated from Canada. So the Canada was mentioned in the show as well. And so though Quadrotriticale doesn't exist, Triticale actually does exist. It's a real grain, which is a crossbreed between wheat and rye, and it was developed as a cereal crop in Manitoba in 1954. So there's a kind of a nice little tie in the thematic side of it, of bringing in the show Star Trek to here too. So that was my really quick and short overview of my collecting. But then I also have an interest in that in judging. So as Chris mentioned, I'm a national level judge, and I've judged a number of thematic exhibits, including Jean's, who I saw early on in her exhibiting experience, and on through to later on to when she was winning the big awards. Well, those of you who've exhibited, and you're probably familiar with the exhibitor feedback form that you see on the right there, and there's sections that cover treatment, knowledge, rarity, presentation, and so on. And there's points that are associated with each of those, and those points then add up and determine what a medal level is for that you might have. Thematic exhibiting, in that second section there, knowledge, study, and the research, is the one that's different than the other exhibits and the other classes of exhibits, in that instead of the 25-10 breakdown, it's divided same number of points, but they're divided 50-50 based on philatelic and thematic knowledge. So they're handled equally as to your ability to illustrate philatelic. So the information about the cancels, the stamps, the routing, and so on, as well as the thematic, the story that we've chosen here. So what are the components that make up a thematic exhibit? Well, first of all, I would suggest that for those who haven't already looked at the APS Manual of Philatelic Judging and Exhibiting, to download the current version of it and look up the thematic section to see what is allowed in a thematic exhibit versus a topical, or versus postal history and so on, because it does have its very own rules for sort of what you can include and what they expect to see. A thematic should be put together as a good story. So you want a beginning that introduces the topic to you, and it's going to grab your interest. So you want it to be something that the viewer wants to stick around and look at the whole exhibit. The middle section is that flows from the chapters. So the one chapter leads into the next, and it tells a logical flow of the story. So you take the viewer on a journey through the topic that you have. And then you want that strong ending. There's a number of times, and my fellow judges would attest to this, is where somebody just leaves you hanging. They don't know how to properly end that exhibit. Like they just, it just comes to an end, and that's not like any good book that you have would do that either. Is you want one that has a good logical ending, and that's a real skill to have. But talk to people about it if you're unsure, and get their opinions as to how you think a good ending would be for your exhibit. A thematic exhibit should have a good table of contents. It's critical. You have to have it. If you don't have it, it's going to be pointed out to you. It should have as many different philatelic elements as possible. And we've alluded to that already, but not only just as many possible through the exhibit, but on each page, you're looking to have several different examples of these elements. Again, those elements could be cancels of different sorts, the stamps, postal stationery, revenue stamps, and so on. As I said, there's hundreds of them. So you want to try to get as many on those pages as possible. You need to demonstrate your thematic and philatelic knowledge and research. So 50-50 weighting for each. This is different than the other classes, as I mentioned. Properly highlight your rare items and explain on the title page, explain how to find those rare items. So if you're using a mat, or if you're bordering them, or using dots, there is no right way for doing that. It's really up to your taste. You don't want anything too ungodly looking anyways, but highlight them and tell us how you're going to highlight them. And then once on the items themselves, explain why they're rare or more significant than the others. And quantifying that is the best way of doing it. But whatever is appropriate to you find for identifying why that item is more significant than others. And it should be attractive to look at, even if it just counts for 5 out of 100 points. These are really important points. And just as a judge, when you see a really nice looking exhibit, it just puts you in a good mood, and you just want to be able to get that exhibit as many points as you can, because it's a beautiful looking exhibit. So though they're only 5, they're very important 5. So what I did was I went on to the APE site, the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, and they have a catalog of exhibits online. And I would strongly suggest anybody who's wanting to get into, say, thematic exhibiting or exhibiting in general, go and search out what some of these online exhibits are. And one of the nice things that it does show you is that you can get the class that that I believe you can get the class that it was in, but it also tells you the awards that it's won. So in this case, this one frame exhibit by Fran Adams won a large gold in the grand award. So that immediately thinks, okay, obviously there's some judges that thought there was something really good about this exhibit. So let's have a look and see what it was. So I picked the first and the last page of the exhibit just to briefly talk about some of the components of what makes it a nice exhibit. And first off, the unique page size, you'll notice these square pages are not the 8.5 by 11, not by 11 by 17. So they're three, I'm assuming there were 12 pages. So I'm assuming 3 pages across and down by 4. So this page size actually lends itself to handling wider items like envelopes and that sort of thing better, and it gives you more room to play with than say an 8.5 by 11. That's why you see some people choosing to use the 11 by 17 page sizes. So that's kind of a neat part of this exhibit. On the left page, so our title page, it starts off with the exhibit focus. So they tell us what it is that we're going to be seeing. And so we know exactly what it's going to be by the statement. It has that exhibit plan, the table of contents. So again, that's critical. Just below that, they tell us how we can find the more significant items, so harder to obtain. So they say they're outlined in the darker blue, and you can see that on the first page there on the item that's on the bottom, as well as the smaller square on the conclusion page. So beautifully put together, states what the exhibit will be showing. On the right-hand page, you see a number of different elements. You see the meter mark, you see pre-production material, you see the cover there, and so they're bringing together several different elements on this page, which is what we're hoping for. So it's good for that. On the tops of the page there, you see the use of headers and subheaders. Again, so we know where we are in the story. If we can relate it back to the exhibit plan, we can quickly try and find, if we're interested in, say, number 6, the meeting, we would look through that and find for the header and be able to come right to it. There's appropriate amount of text talking about thematic as well as philatelic knowledge. And it has a good ending, like it's the successful meeting at the end. So they brought it to a conclusion, and it's just a nice presentation. They've done a nice job of mounting everything, and so it's a nice thematic exhibit here. So with that, I think what I just want to drive home here is that most importantly, don't get hung up on the medal levels. Have fun. Thematic collecting really lends itself to this. My thematic exhibit likely will never win a large gold or grand award like Jean says, just because of the nature of the topic. I don't have a lot of early material that I can collect, but properly put together, it should do well. And more so is the fact that I'm having a lot of fun working with that thematic, because while I have my other exhibits and collections, the Prince Edward Island and the display one that are I'm actively collecting, it's nice to have these other ones, and in particular thematic collections and exhibits that we can go to when we're not finding material for our main collection, let's say, and it gives us another type of area of collecting when we go to the shows and working with our dealers, or going online with Del Campi and eBay to look for material and to be able to add to our collections. So with that, I thank you, and I'll pass this back to Chris.
Well, thank you, Rob. You